Good morning, Cult Nation. Hope you guys are all having a great start to your Wednesday morning. I do want to thank everybody who participated in Spirit Week last week. It sure was fun seeing everybody celebrate each day and just having some fun with it. So thank you for that. Now that we have moved into November, I kind of would like you guys to take a little bit of time each day just to be grateful. And I call it gratitude. Trying to take about 4 to 5 minutes, or not even that long, doesn't have to be that long, to either write down things that you're thankful for, or just kind of have a conversation in your head about the things that you're grateful for. And what you're going to see when you start doing that is when you're being grateful for things, you're in a more positive mindset. So remember, that is one of the things that we talked about, is how our brains are trained for negativity bias. And so if we can, I'm choosing November because Thanksgiving is in November. And so we can be thankful for things each and every day this month, just to kind of get in the habit of being able to recognize the positive things that are going on in our lives each and every day that sometimes we can forget when we're getting stressed out, especially during NTI. I know that it's challenging, and just with the pandemic and how it's kind of flipped our worlds upside down. And I know it's been a while and we're still adjusting to it. So just kind of try to remember that, to think of things that you're grateful for each and every day this month. I'm doing the same thing. I have a little journal that I do the same thing with, the 5-minute gratitude journal. So I, write down my thoughts. You don't have to take it to that step. You can just simply think about them in your head. So enough about that. I do want to get started with today's lesson. So let me go ahead and present my screen to you. Whoops. There we go. Okay. So last week we were talking about how minor conflicts can become major conflicts. And we talked about ways that we can prevent that from happening, right? So there were some strategies that we talked about. We learned how conflicts escalate because we're either making assumptions, we're assuming that somebody is doing something intentionally to harm us or to be negative. We have a hard time controlling our emotions, and that can escalate a conflict, and we can involve others, right? And that can escalate things as well. So we talked about some different strategies, as walking away, counting, deep breathing, things like that, reframing our thoughts, and thinking positively, that positive self-talk that we talked about. I know that at the end of the lesson last week, I had asked you guys to come up with a phrase, just a short little phrase that you can say to yourself when you are in the middle of a conflict and you need to remember to use your strategies. And so it's just like 2 phrases, like mine that I shared last week was, "Really, Waddell?" Like, that's something that I say a lot to myself in my head. I even say it out loud sometimes if I'm sitting at the computer or just got off the phone or something. And when you do that, you're just kind of reminding yourself to use some of those strategies. Because remember, the way that our brains are wired is that we feel a strong emotion before we can process it. It's not an instant thing. It's not like we feel a strong emotion and then we can make a good decision at the same time. It takes a while for the cortex part of our brain to process it appropriately, right? To weigh out the options so we can make a good decision. And so by doing those strategies and by having that short phrase, you're kind of reminding yourself to use those strategies while you're in the moment. So that was just a little quick recap of what we talked about last week. Today's topic is conflicts and perspectives. And so we're going to learn how to listen to and consider someone else's perspective during a conflict. Keeping calm in a conflict helps to keep minor conflicts from escalating into major ones. But there are other things that we can do as well. So today we're going to learn how to listen, right? And listening can be hard. And also being able to consider someone else's perspective during a conflict. We might have been told a few times it's not just about us, right? Maybe your mom said it's not all about you. I said that to my own daughter just yesterday. I know I always use them as examples, but it's true. And so we have to be able to see something from somebody else's perspective. So I'm going to go to the next screen here, and I want you to take a picture, take a look at this picture. And I want you to imagine this person is in one of your classes and is walking directly towards you. What do you think she's about to do? What do you think her intentions are? So just based on looking at this photograph, here you are in the hallway. She's a girl in your class, and she's walking up towards you. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about that. So since I can't hear your all's thoughts because it's a recorded lesson, I'm sure that some of you guys thought that she was going to maybe be confrontational, right? She looks a little angry. She looks a little upset. Can't really tell. She's definitely not looking happy, in my opinion. And maybe she's about to be, yelling at me or something. I'm not really sure. Now, what if you knew that she was worried about an assignment and wanted your help? Put your thumbs up if knowing that changes what you think she's going to do. So I definitely have my thumbs up because now that I have a little insight as to what's going on in her head, it makes a little more sense. So I can kind of let my guard down a little bit. Because if she's coming up to me with that face, I might be a little guarded and I might be ready to kind of match her energy, right? So now that I know that she's worried about an assignment and we have the class together, what do you think she's going to do now? So we have a little insight. So now that I know that she's, worried about this assignment, I think that she's going to come up and ask me questions about like maybe how I did the assignment, or ask me, did you struggle with the assignment too? Because I don't understand it at all. I just don't get it. I was up all night trying to figure it out and I couldn't figure it out. Okay, so knowing that little piece, it just kind of changes those thoughts in our head, right? Because at first we thought she was going to be confrontational. Then we got a little bit of information and I told you that she is worried about an assignment. So now my thoughts are changing. So now I'm like, man, I feel bad that she's stressing out about this. How can I help her? Right? I'm in the same class too. Maybe I'm struggling with it and we can, bounce ideas off each other. Let's look at some vocabulary. So what does perspective taking mean? There is a difference between perspective and perspective thinking. Okay, so let's look at these differences. We know that jumping to conclusions and assuming negative intentions are two common reasons that conflicts escalate. Okay, we jump to conclusions without having all the facts, and we can make assumptions that negative intentions were there. Remember, we learned about that negativity bias and how our brains are naturally wired to think that way, which is why we tend to do that. So let's see. Before I do that, I want you to think about this question, though. How do you feel when someone's wrong about your perspective? Think about that. How do you feel when someone's wrong about your perspective? So you might feel misunderstood. You might feel like you're being blamed. You might feel disrespected, upset, angry, right? Let's see how we can use what we know about how our brains work and the emotion management strategies we learned to avoid jumping to conclusions and assuming negative intentions. Okay, let's go over these though, because to do that, we're going to have to be able to look at it from another perspective. So let's find out what the difference between perspective and perspective taking is. A perspective is how someone thinks or feels about something based on experience or their personal preference. That is perspective. Perspective taking is the process of being able to identify and understand another person's feelings, thoughts, needs, and wants. So there's a difference there, right? And today we're going to focus on perspective taking. We need to be able to process what someone else's thoughts and feelings are, right? And how that's connected to their needs and wants. So let's see how we can use our self-management strategies in the following scenarios. So I'm going to go over here, and we have a scenario here that involves jumping to conclusions. Okay, I'm going to read this scenario out loud. Frankie is leaving the girls' bathroom when she hears Roy say her name down the hall, and all his friends start laughing immediately. She's really upset. Why are they laughing at me? She thinks. What decision has Frankie made about Roy and his friends' perspectives? So she thinks that since the title is jumping to conclusions, it looks like Frankie is jumping to the conclusion that they're making fun of her, right? She hears her name, so they know that they're talking about her. And they're all laughing, so that makes it awkward, right? Because she knows that her name was involved and they're laughing at her. Let's look at ways that we can avoid. Ways to avoid jumping to conclusions is by being able to manage your emotions, stop and think, get some more information, and ask direct questions about the other person's perspective. So that's easy for me to say. It's not as easy for us to actually do. So a lot of times, if we're in this situation, we get upset. We might be confrontational. We might respond negatively. But what we should be doing is exactly what they said. Let's get some more information about what is happening. Ask some direct questions. So that could be, hey, what are you guys talking about? Or, hey, what are you guys laughing at? Because here's the perspective. When it turns out that Roy told his friends he was thinking about asking Frankie to the upcoming dance. And Roy's friends were laughing at him because they didn't think he had the nerve to ask her. So really, nobody was making fun of Frankie. It appeared that way to Frankie. Frankie felt like that because she was making an assumption, jumping to conclusions, right? But in reality, Roy wants to take her to the dance. So if Frankie would have, gone up to that, situation and been confrontational, maybe that would have resulted in Roy being like, well, geez, I don't want to take her to the dance, right? So it's important that we have all the pieces, right? And that may mean that you have to step out of your comfort zone and ask that direct question, like, hey guys, like, why are y'all laughing? Are y'all talking about me? Like, I heard my name, and not being confrontational about it. You're just kind of gathering pieces, right? And then with that information, then we can respond, right? Let's look at another scenario. Assuming negative intentions. So remember, that's another one that can escalate a small conflict to a major conflict. Last week, Dennis didn't log on. He texted Andre to say he was busy, though. He did the same thing this week, but didn't text. Andre waited online for him for 15 minutes. He's blowing me off, he thinks. He doesn't want to play with me anymore, and he doesn't have the courage to tell me. Andre now sends Dennis an angry text message. All right. So let's see. We need to be able to reframe those unhelpful thoughts. So let's look what he said again. In his head, he's saying he's blowing me off. He doesn't want to play with me anymore. He doesn't have the courage to tell me he doesn't want to play anymore. Instead of those negative thoughts, because let's look at this, his negative, we talked about that cycle of how our emotions, kind of dictate the thoughts that go in our head, and those thoughts, will dictate what decision we make. And so Andre ends up getting mad and sending an angry text message, right? And it's important that we remember that we can't take back words that we say, right? So it's important that we're using some of these strategies. What he should do is reframe those unhelpful thoughts. Here's some examples of how he could do that. I don't know what's going on for him. Maybe he's busy again. This is the first time that he hasn't texted me back. It's no big deal. I know he likes playing with me. Okay, that would be a way that you can reframe those unhelpful thoughts. And then you can give yourself some time to process it. And by running those helpful thoughts in your head now, you're more likely going to be understanding the next time that you see Dennis, right? Because maybe Dennis got grounded and he got his controller taken away, right? We don't know that. So we're jumping to conclusions and assuming negative things. And now we're sending off mean text messages, and it could have been avoided had we paused, reframe those unhelpful thoughts, give ourselves time to process things, right? And then look at the positive side of it. Look at other things that could have happened instead of assuming the worst. Okay. Could have done some positive self-talk. He could have told himself, like, listen, he's been my friend for a long time. They've known each other since elementary school. They have a lot of fun together. They've been really committed to playing each week. This is something that they do every single week, right? So we're spinning that negative talk into some positive self-talk. Okay, because remember how that helps our brains is when we begin to think positively, then our actions will follow that. We have one more scenario involving others. Brian's friends all got good grades in math this semester, but Brian's grade was much lower than he expected. He's really upset and starts telling others that he got a low grade because his teacher doesn't like him. How could Brian reframe his unhelpful thoughts, assume positive intentions, and use positive self-talk instead? I want you to kind of think about that. This one doesn't have anything for me to click on to show you, but I want you to think about that. So maybe math is not Brian's thing, right? Or maybe it is, and he just did kind of poorly on a test, right? How could Brian reframe his unhelpful thoughts? So think about that for a second. So right now it looks like he's blaming his teacher, saying that the teacher doesn't like him and that's why he didn't do well. To reframe that unhelpful thought, some thoughts you can have in your head is, well, I know that I didn't get to study really hard for that test. I wasn't as focused as I normally am. I could have, paid attention in class more. Maybe I need to get with my friends because they got good grades. So maybe they have some, tips and strategies that they can give me. If we look at the next one, assuming positive intentions, right? I guess an example of that would be not placing the blame on the teacher, right? Like, I know the teacher, she's explained this, and maybe I can see if she can meet with me after school or before school because I always get to school early. Maybe she can help me or he can help me with what it is that I'm kind of having a hard time with. And using positive self-talk instead of negative self-talk. So right now he's comparing himself to his friends, which is never good to do, right? Because when we start comparing, that can really lead to a negative downward spiral, right? When we compare ourselves to others. That's why it's important for us to know what our own strengths are, That way, when we do hit a bump in the road, and something negative or unfortunate comes along, then we can remind ourselves of our positive self-talk. So an example of that would be, maybe Brian's not great at math, but he's an excellent writer, and he loves English. And so he just knows that math is his weakness. We all have weaknesses, right? But if Brian can be like, well, I did get good grades in all my other classes, so maybe I just need to focus some more on my math class, right? That way he's kind of putting that positive spin on it, and he's like, I know I didn't get a good grade in math, but my other grades are great, and my teacher says I'm an amazing writer and I have a lot of talent and potential, or maybe I'm really good at art and drawing, I'm good with technology, but this math just kind of holds me back a little bit. So being able to do that positive self-talk can definitely help. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. I want you guys to think about a time when you guys were involved in a conflict and you listened to the other person's perspective. Think about these two questions, and this is going to be on your assignment that I'm going to go over in just a second. How did listening to their perspective change your own perspective of the conflict? And how could you have listened to their perspective before the conflict even escalated? If we can learn to take the time to communicate with the other person, to listen to their perspective, a lot of conflicts can be prevented from escalating. And you'll learn a lot. Okay, so think about a time when you were involved in that conflict. It can be with a sibling, a classmate, a parent, a teacher. Think about how listening to their perspective changed your own. Okay, I know that, I get into it with my sister sometimes, right? And I make assumptions and I assume things that, she's doing things intentionally on purpose. And, we'll start texting back and forth, and getting kind of nasty with each other. And, then we'll involve outside people. We'll get our other, brother involved, or our mom and a dad. And then it escalates. And then, when my sister and we sit down and we talk about it, and I can listen to her explain her side of things, then it really changes perspective for me. And I'm like, well, geez, I didn't think of it like that. Like, that's not how I thought. Like, I assumed that when you said this, I took it as this, right? And so we're able to sit there and have a conversation, and it honestly does change my mind, or it at least gives me an idea as to why my sister did that. And I didn't know. And so then here I am getting all my other family worked up and involved in it, when I should have just sat my sister down and just had a conversation with her. And I'm 36 years old, and I'm, it's just something that we just kind of struggle with sometimes, right? And so this is important for us to just kind of have these tools in our tool belt, so that when conflicts do come up, because they will, that we know how to respond to them. When our strong emotions are felt, which they will, we have the tools in our tool belt to handle those situations. So I appreciate your all's attention and participation this morning. Before I log off, I do want to go over today's assignment briefly. It's just a one-pager, so you're going to see that it's going to ask you to define the following terms. You're going to define what perspective is, and then what perspective taking is. So remember, there was a difference between the two. Then you guys have a scenario. I'll read it out loud quickly for you. Cody and Jeremy always sit next to each other in English class. However, today, Cody sat in a different seat next to Sean and started talking about Fortnite. Jeremy's feelings are hurt. He thinks to himself, why doesn't Cody want to be my friend anymore? Then he puts his head down on his desk and does not participate in the lesson. How could Jeremy reframe his unhelpful thoughts and assume positive intentions instead? List at least 2 helpful thoughts. So kind of think about that. How could Jeremy use positive self-talk list at least 2 good things Jeremy could notice about his friendship with Cody and what he could say to himself about him. Then this is the reflection piece that we talked about right there at the end of the lesson. Think about a time when you were involved in a conflict and listen to the other person's perspective. How did listening to their perspective change your own perspective of the conflict? How could you have listened to their perspective before the conflict escalated? And that concludes today's lesson. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. If you guys have any questions or need to reach out to me, please don't hesitate to do that. I would love to chat with you guys. We can set up a Google Meet or Zoom. I can help you through anything that you guys might be going through. So if you want to email me, it's natalie.waddell@jefferson.kyschools.us. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. You guys have a great rest of the day. Remember, take time to be thankful for something each and every day this month.